When considering country property, there are basically two ways to go about purchasing country property. One is to buy property that is already existing with buildings on it, and the other is to develop bare land. In this module, we're going to take a look at the pros and cons of developing bare land for country property, and then we'll briefly touch on the advantages and disadvantages of purchasing an already existing country property with buildings on it. So what are the benefits of developing your own country homestead from bare land? I'd like to suggest, first of all, is you get to design the property layout to fit your needs. That can have to do with where the house is located, where your gardens are, where your outbuildings, where your orchard, taking advantage of any view or special features that you want to highlight. If you purchase property that is already developed, you are locked into the way the property is laid out. So one of the advantages of starting with bare land is you're in control of how that property is going to be developed. The next thing is you're able to design your own home. And this is an equally important one because, for instance, if you're wanting to be sustainable, then you're going to probably heat your house with firewood. And an old house with a fireplace is not very efficient use of firewood. A fireplace is not a good option unless you modify it with an insert. So if you were going to build a new house, then you would want to accommodate the ability to have a wood burning heating source in the home, which could either be an airtight wood stove or it could be an airtight kitchen wood stove that's got a big enough firebox to heat the house. And then one of the other advantages is if you just built a brand new house, not only do you get to design the house and pick the colors and cabinets and all that fun stuff, but you end up with a brand new house. And I don't know if everywhere is the case, but where we live, if you have a brand new house, there is a 1-year warranty on the building. So I believe that's probably a mandate of the state, and so I don't think the builders would voluntarily do that, but no doubt they probably buy insurance for that or plan to be able to fix anything that needs repaired or replaced during that first year. So as I see it, there's three main benefits of developing your own country homestead. One is you get to decide how to lay the land out. Next, you get to design the house and pick all the amenities. And last of all, you end up with something brand new. Here are some things to research when considering bare land for developing a country homestead. First of all, zoning considerations. That can have to do with whether you can build at all. It can have to do with the tax implications. It can have to do with a variety of things. For instance, the property that we are currently on in country property, it used to be timberland. And so in order to be able to have a residence on it, we had to rezone a small portion of the timberland so that it could be zoned for residential purposes. It's not uncommon where we live in Western Washington for an acreage, let's say 5 or 20 acres of land. If you look at the map, and we talked about how to do that in the previous session of how to look for land, when you look at the county IMAP functions and you look at the maps of each of these parcels, you oftentimes in the country will find a large parcel, 10 or 20 acres, and in that is a 1 acre embedded in that larger parcel. And the reason is the 1 acre is where the house goes. So in our case, we have timberland still, and but we have a section of a couple of acres that is where the house and the buildings go. And what that means is not only are you allowed to do that in that area, but your taxes change. In the case of timberland, the taxes are very cheap until you log it, and then you pay what's called stumpage. That's the taxes at the time of selling it, which is nice because for 30 or 40 years, maybe your whole lifetime, you may not log it. So the taxes are cheap, but then the taxes where the house is are expensive. Another thing to consider is flooding. If you go to the county, they have floodplain maps. And these maps show where the water is anticipated to go in a flooding situation. It's not uncommon for there to be a 100-year floodplain and a 500-year floodplain. So the 100-year floodplain is where the worst flooding in 100 years would go, and the 500 is probably worse than like they anticipate it, because they obviously haven't been around for 500 years. So a floodplain map will tell you whether you can build in that kind of an area or not. So if you were looking at property that had the history of flooding, they probably would not let you build unless you accommodated for a flood. Another thing is HOAs. Excuse me. HOAs are homeowners association rules and policies. Oftentimes in the country you won't have HOAs, but it's quite common in developments in town, like suburbs and things like that. And what an HOA does is it attempts to control the neighbors. So for instance, if you built a nice new house on this new development and you're the first house and there were no HOAs, then the next house could be a junky house. The one next to it could be not even a house, but a portable building or something like that. And so HOAs, good intentions are to have everybody live within parameters to protect the value of their property. For instance, the previous country property we had was in a development, a 5-acre and more gated community kind of thing. And one of the HOAs is you couldn't build a house that was too small because there were nice houses in that development. And so, and you had to submit your plans to an architectural committee to be approved to build your house, so that a substandard, cheap, small house wouldn't draw down the value of the nicer homes. Now, if you are a fan of personal freedom, that's something you probably don't want. Most people that move in the country don't want the encumbrances of rules and regulations having to do with their property. On the other hand, when we bought this acreage, timberland, the one parcel that you crossed to get in was owned by the same owner. And so we, at our initiative, put some HOAs on the 3 parcels that were involved. And they had to do with, again, protecting the value of our property. So some of the unique things we have is you can't have a bunch of junky cars. You can't have a mean dog. You can't have an unkempt yard and junk around, because as you drive into our place, you're crossing a lower property from the county road, and we wanted to make sure that it was going to be nice driving in and not an eyesore. I'm sure you have all seen properties where the neighbor's place is just a mess and there's nothing you can do about it. So that's what HOAs are about. Sometimes they're an advantage, sometimes you don't want them. So that's something to consider. Well water. If you're in the country, you probably have a well. And if you are developing bare land, then there isn't a well. So one of the risks is that you are assuming that you can drill a well and that you'll get adequate water and good water. I say it's a risk because even the well driller doesn't know for sure until you spend the money to find out. Now, a way to have an idea is to look at the well logs of the nearby neighbors. And you can go ask them, and you can also look at the county, and there are documented records for every well and it'll tell you how many gallons per minute and all of that sort of thing, and how deep they had to go. So it's good to research that, and you might even consider that might be a condition of buying it, is that you can successfully get water. But the reality is you're going to take the risk, because if you don't buy the land, you're not going to spend $15,000 on somebody else's land to see if you can get water. So, and then we have some unique situations that have happened in the state of Washington, at least, and probably other parts of the country, where you can't drill a well. For a while, it was statewide a few years ago, where there was a lawsuit, and the result of the lawsuit was that you couldn't drill a well anywhere unless you hired a hydrologist and an attorney, and you had to find out, you had to be able to prove that you pulling water out of that water table isn't going to impact a neighbor. And you could have a neighbor that's bare land at some big corporation, and it could get complicated. Fortunately, that has changed, and so you just spend $500 and the county takes the risk, apparently. Our county is not so fortunate. Our county has a different lawsuit from 3 tribal Indian tribes that collaborated together and sued and won the right to all the water for the sake of the fish in the river. So any property in our county where the water drains into the river, which is about 80% of the county, cannot drill a well in the country. So now, when we bought our property, when we were looking at it, that wasn't the case. By the time we had a deal to buy it, that moratorium had gone into effect. And we wanted the property enough that we bought it anyway, but we got a reduced price because of it. And the option, which isn't legal in some places, but it now is the option here because you can't drill a well, is rainwater catchment. And that's where you collect the water from the rain off your roofs and put them in a tank, and then you use that water as your drinking water and your domestic water and irrigation water. So in a later presentation, we'll go in depth of how that works. But the point of this exercise is the research you need to do on any property that you're looking for to develop is you need to analyze the water. Now, if you're buying property that has a house, then my suggestion is look at the records for the water, ask some questions about, does the well go dry in the dryness of summer? If so, what's their solution? Is there a cistern tank that it pumps into? You know, do they have to get water from a neighbor? What kind of water? I recommend asking to drink a glass of water and look at their filtration system. I have a neighbor, he has perfect water. It's off the mountain aquifer, and he doesn't do any filtering or anything. It's perfect, tastes wonderful. The guy right next door in the next 10 acres has arsenic in his water. So he can't drink the water. He's been buying bottled water for domestic use for 15 years. So it's really important that you do research about water. Okay, and the other thing in passing is, in my opinion, the ultimate, and it's hard to find, is to have surface water on your property. A spring, a creek, a river, something of that nature would be a real plus. Because if times got really hard, you could at least take a pail down and get some water. Okay, the other thing is, where does your waste go? in the country, your sewage is going to be done in a septic system. A septic system, unlike the city, where it just goes in the pipe to the city treatment plant, a septic system, the sewage goes into a tank, multiple compartment tank, and then the liquid goes into pipes in a field underground, and they absorb and evaporate and just go away. And so that's how a septic system works in a drain field. Well, not every soil is going to work for making a septic system function. So there's something that is called a perk test, where you would pay for the county environmental health person to come. You dig 3 holes in the area where you think it's going to be done, and then they come and they pour water in the hole and they watch how long it takes for the water to go away. And from that observation, they will either approve or disapprove putting in a drain field in that vicinity. And the results of that can be either a conventional system, which is what you want, ideally. They're big 3 or 4 inch pipes with holes in them. Or if that doesn't work, then you have a pressured system. And a pressured system is a 1 inch pipe with holes in it. And because it's a small pipe, it has to have pressure to push it through the pipe. This can either be done by a system that has gravity to make it go, or usually it's an electric pump with some controls and alarms and all that sort of thing. The other option, which is really one I hate, is called a mound system. And that is the soil in any way, shape, or form isn't going to work. So they literally build with new soil above the ground. And so you have this mound up on top of the ground, and it's there forever. It looks pretty ugly. So that's what that is. The next thing you need to consider is fire protection. Even in the country, there are volunteer fire departments. You will notice when you drive on a highway, you'll see a sign once in a while, entering Fire District 8 or whatever. That means that geographic area is a part of that fire district, that fire station. And you pay taxes to have that protection. The problem is you need to make sure that your property is in the fire district. Because if you're buying some undeveloped land that's out, it may not have that option. So for instance, our immediate neighbor, before we owned this land, he bought his acreage and he built a house, but because he wasn't in the fire district, he had to put in a commercial grade sprinkler system in his house. Every room has a sprinkler head like a commercial building has, and a reserve water tank, so that if there was a fire, his system, his house would have sprinklers in it, which is pretty expensive. It was probably $30,000 at least. In our case, because we were surrounded on 2 sides with fire district, we negotiated, as actually one of the conditions of buying the land, we went through the process of applying with the county and the fire district to be included in the fire district, and we were successful with that. So our taxes are a little higher for the fire district, but now we don't have to worry about not having fire protection. And then you want to look at taxes. Property taxes per $1,000 vary from place to place and county to county. But you go to the county records at the assessor's office, and it will, for that parcel, it will tell you itemized what they assess the buildings to be worth, what they assess the property to be worth, what the total value of that package is, and how much per $1,000 is the taxes. which is local taxes. It also includes school levies and things like that. And so then you will know from those records what the taxes are for the bare land. Keep in mind, when you put a house on, it's going to increase significantly. Then you need to think about financing options. If you are developing if you're going to buy, I should say, bare land, you're likely not going to be able to go to a bank and say, I want to borrow money to buy bare land. So you either have to have cash for the land, or it's not uncommon for the seller to hold a contract like the bank would for you to be able to make payments on the property. The reason they're willing to do that is not very many people have cash to buy bare land. So if you have an arrangement, then for instance, we've built 5 houses and remodeled 1. And the first house we built, we bought the property, and when it was paid for, then we used the value of the land as the down payment for building the house. And so anyway, you need to look into the financing of that, and make sure that you have a couple of banks that are willing to loan you money for all the way to the end of the project. That means you have a way to purchase the land, you have a way to build the house. Often the builder will have connections with banks, are used to them, and they'll have what's called a construction loan that you are responsible for, but it's in coordination with the builder. And so the construction loan, it's a short-term loan, and the banks dole out the money to reimburse the builder step by step. They don't get the money up front. They get it as each step is required, so they have the money to proceed, but they have to prove that they're making progress. Once the construction loan is done and the house is built, then the bank rolls it over into a regular mortgage, 20 or 30-year mortgage. So that you need to consider the financial implications if you're going to build bare land. Here's the steps required in developing your own country homestead from bare land. And this may not be complete, but it's a pretty good sequence. First of all is you're planning the layout of the buildings and the infrastructure, like where's the septic and the drain field going to go, where's the well, am I going to have a outbuilding like a shop or a barn, how's the driveway going to be coming in. You want to, at this stage, be thinking seriously about building the house to fit the land. And the problem is, oftentimes people, not knowing, make the mistake, like a friend of mine did. They bought 5 acres and they bought a house plan out of a magazine. And then a builder built that house. The problem is that house wasn't made for that property. So when you drive into their property, you have no idea where the front door is. And people go to the back door instead of the front door. So some things to think about like that. Or it may not be taking advantage of the most picturesque part of the property. If you have a view of anything, you're going to want to have the rooms that want to see the view be on that side of the house. So the layout of the land also has to do with how you orient the building and which rooms and everything. You would need to get septic plan approved. You've already done the perk test, and then when the septic is built, it gets inspected just like the stages of doing a house. Water source considerations, we talked about that, but there are some other on the surface kinds of water that would be nice beside a well. That could be a spring, a pond, a reservoir, a river, a lake, a stream. And those are all kind of emergency backups because the county is going to require you to have the well. They're not going to let you use a spring or a reservoir or a river for your primary water source. But if you had one of these, it would be nice when times got tough, you could run down there with a pail and get some water. Then you get a building permit. By this stage, the building plans have a plot plan showing where all the stuff goes on the land. It shows all the different sheets having to do with the house itself and the drain field and septic and all that other stuff, which way the electric comes in. And then the county goes through that. They mark a bunch of red on there for things you need to modify, and then they approve it. And that's what the builder uses to build your house. And at different stages during the process, an inspector will come as part of the fee of getting the permit, and he'll sign off at the foundation, and he'll sign off at the framing and so forth. Now you've got the permit, you have permission to start, so now you clear the land. You don't want to clear the land necessarily until you know you're going to be able to do it, because they might say, well, your drain field can't be here and you need to move the house to here or whatever, and now you've got it designed the wrong way. So you don't actually break ground for serious until you get that building permit in your hands. You're going to have a consideration as part of the building permit process is having an approved way to get onto your property from the public road. That's usually a driveway entrance with a culvert. And then you're going to need power on site so the builders can work. So the power from the road needs to come in, which probably means trenching and bringing it in. And then the electrician will put up what's called a temporary meter base, which is what we're looking at. And it's close to the building at the point at which the power would come into the building when it's finished. And the cable coming in, the wire coming in underground is long enough to go into the building, into the permanent power panel, but it's coiled up down in the dirt, and then put in this power panel, temporary meter base that's about 10 feet away from the building. That leaves enough room for workers to get by and work on it. And that lid at the top opens up in the front so that they can plug in their extension cords to run their equipment. So here are the steps of the actual building. You've now done the steps of preparing the ground and getting the permits and having power and water and all that stuff available. Now here we're building it. First of all, you've got a builder identified, you've done the financing, you did the ground prep, driveway access, you've got power and water. Now we got some new things. You got to have a porta potty on site for the workers, and that usually means renting it. Oftentimes you'll need a dumpster unless you're in the country. I know when we built a house in the city, we had to have a dumpster about the size of a big truck to throw all the debris. If you're in the country, you could be responsible to haul it away or burn it or whatever. Technically, you're not supposed to burn building materials. And then depending on what arrangement you have with your builder, you may be responsible for everything outside of the building. So you might be responsible for building porches and decks, walkways and parking and landscaping. So just because you have a builder, you need to make sure what they're doing, what you're paying for, and what things you're going to have to get done. So what are the benefits of developing your own country homestead from bare land? You get to design how the property is laid out, you get to design the house, and you get a brand new house. But it comes with difficulties. What are the difficulties with developing your own country homestead from bare land? First of all, it takes a long time. It could easily be a year. If you're talking a long driveway and you're talking, having to put in fruit trees and a garden and all these infrastructure, maybe alternative energy, maybe a greenhouse, you could be 5 years doing this. But typically it takes about 6 months or more for the actual house to get built. And then all this other stuff adds on. So it's realistic from the time you broke ground till the time the house was built. Could be 6 months to a year. And then you've got, your yard work and things to do that will go on as you have the time. One thing about developing bare land, and particularly if you are building the house yourself, swinging the hammer, is the unpredictability of the costs. If you buy a piece of property that's got a house and a shop and a well and everything's there and the grass and what have you, you know for sure how much this is going to cost. And you can go to a bank and get a loan and you're in good shape. On the other hand, if you're going to develop it, you don't really know for sure how much everything's going to cost. And you will always have surprises of unexpected things that you have to be responsible for that cost money. You also have the possibility of weather and scheduling difficulties. For instance, what if you get a big monsoon rainstorm, or what if you get really cold weather and, you know, or a storm and trees are falling down or something. That could interrupt the scheduling of how things are getting done. The other thing is, when we built our last country property here, we seriously considered being the general contractor. We have experience doing that. We've built our own houses, but we were new to the area, and it was a God thing that we didn't do it ourselves, because it was when all of a sudden construction was in really high demand. We couldn't even get a subcontractor to respond to our phone message, let alone give us a bid and be competitive. So we would have really been in trouble, because if we had everything lined up, we have all the subs, we have everything lined up, and then one of them doesn't do it on time, everything else after that gets moved. And that can get really complicated, and you could get a sub that'd get mad and just say, I'm not coming back. So when you have a builder build it for you, they already have relationships with the subs, and the sub wants to keep them happy because they want the next house too. So that's what we did. We developed the land and did everything outside the house, but we also hired a contractor company to build the house. And that worked really well, because of that 6 months of them building the house, I really honestly think there was maybe 1 or 2 days total that somebody wasn't working on the house. Of course, we didn't work on Sabbaths. I'm talking Monday through Friday. But they were very good about staying on task. And I know if we had been responsible for building the house, that wouldn't have been so fortunate. So then the other issue is, where do you live in the meantime? You could do like we did one time, and that is live in an RV. We had a family of 4 living in a 27-foot motorhome, and I'll tell you what, we were in it for 9 months, and it gets really old. And by the way, an RV is very cold in the winter. They're not made to be in the winter. So that's a problem. And then what do you do with all your stuff? If you sell your house like we did, we had a house full of stuff and a garage full of stuff and a shop full of stuff. What do you do with it? So you're going to put it in a storage unit. Well, that's going to cost money, and it's not probably got electricity, and it's probably not climate controlled. You don't know about rodents. So what we did is we rented a house, a small house, and we used it as a storage unit, and we took all of our belongings and stacked them all the way to the ceiling. And you could walk shoulder to shoulder down through the hallway to the bedroom. We had a place to sleep, a place to have a shower, and a place to eat. And otherwise, it was all packed full of stuff. It worked really good, and I would recommend that as an option versus an RV. So things to consider when looking for country property to develop or not is, what options do you have for buying country property? Do you have the money? Do you have to borrow? What kind of options do you have? Do you need to rent? That's a viable option. If you're currently in a renting situation, then it would probably be unrealistic this side of a miracle, which is possible, for you to purchase. But you may be able to, for the same money that you're renting in the city, you might be able to rent in the country, and there have been occasions where rent to own is a possibility as well. So it's worth exploring and praying about. Which option works best for you if you're purchasing, and are you going to find it best for your skill set and your experience to embark on developing land and creating, building a home, or are you better off to purchase something that already exists and possibly do some remodeling as needed? Which option fits your budget the best? And of course, you need to pray for God's leading and watch for the hand of the Lord. Now we're going to conclude this presentation with Andrew Rice talking about his experience in terms of purchasing something that already existed and the pros and cons of doing it that way.
An existing country home, the pros and cons of purchasing existing property. So there are some distinct benefits of purchasing existing property. Number one, it's immediately available, of course, depending on its readiness. It has existing water, existing power, there's already sewer or septic in place, and there already is a house or other structures on the property. Those are distinct benefits. So move-in ready could definitely be ready to just walk in and move in. This is just an example of a country property that you may find has had some renovations done, it appears, having the porch added. Definitely has a benefit of a metal roof that could be utilized for water catchment as well as durability, fire resistance, but it also shows evidence of age and potential remodel necessities on the interior, as well as maybe updating on the exterior and windows depending on your preferences. So depending on what you find, there can be a variety of different levels of readiness and preparation ready for what you would consider ready to live in, although it would be much less than having to build a property from scratch and developing all the existing services that go along with that. So move-in ready can take very many different forms depending on the property that is selected or available. One of the things that you do have already existing, you don't have to drill a well. You have water already accessible. Typically in a country property, being well accessed, you would be chlorine free, which is a huge benefit, and fluoride free. So those are two huge benefits. Fluoride is actually a byproduct of the aluminum industry and has been added to water under the guise of a health benefit, which is actually a health detriment as it's a neurotoxin. So any water that you would encounter from a well could have variable taste, so that's something you'd want to definitely check out when you're doing your research on a property. It could have rust associated with it. We are blessed where we live with pure, clean water with no extra smells, no extra hardness. Some people have to soften their water before they can even do their laundry because it comes out looking like orange juice, as in the picture on the right. The pipes, we actually had to do a repiping of our copper pipes because there are pinholes that are developing. If you do that, adding PEX or PVC, actually PEX is probably the best current alternative for piping in that it is freeze resistant as well. It won't succumb to a freeze if you have a severe cold crunch with no heating because the PEX expands with freezing and then contracts back to its normal size without breaking. That's a huge benefit for PEX, as well as its ease of installation. So how old are your pipes in your house? Copper pipe can last a long time, but it's subject to pinholes, and we were at or past the age of our pipes and developing pinholes here and there in our piping. Some water sources can have some distinct odors associated with them. Sulfur, those are just kind of inconveniences, but can make it unpalatable as well. Not that it's poisonous necessarily, but you're less likely to drink it, and water is a key component to a healthy lifestyle. So you'd want to have water that you have available to drink that you would want to drink. Definitely want to test for bacteria and may even test for agrochemicals depending on where you have your well located. Some watersheds have farm chemicals that may be associated with them. Power. So you can have power coming into your property either above ground, underground. Those are the two primary ways. What's the age of the system in your neighborhood? That can definitely play into the reliability of your power grid. Interestingly enough, our house is serviced directly by an underground system, but locally by power poles, so we have in and out outages. In fact, the first day we moved into our home, as we were moving in, we had a power outage, which turned out to be from the road to our power box, to the green power transformer. And the underground power system has had a number of different breaks in that system since we've lived here. And I think that they've actually updated it now, because once they get about 6 breaks in a given line, they'll replace it. Up until then, they just replace it. So there are things that can affect underground power as well as that of above ground power. Of course, you could always move towards less power dependence on the grid through solar or wind alternatives, depending on your location. So one thing that you can look for is a good southern exposure for solar power access or wind availability, depending on where you're located. Definitely want to have your septic or sewer system inspected prior to purchase. That's an expensive operation if you have to replace it. $3,500 to $15,000, depending on whether it's a conventional engineered system. This is a typical conventional system that we're looking at here with a drain field. And if you needed to redo that drain field, you would have to find a different location that would perk on your property, that would be separate from the existing drain field, but still within reach of your house and sewer system. So that could be a rather large undertaking if necessary. You may even have to replace your septic tank. Definitely have it pumped and ready for use prior to occupying, so that it's clean and ready to go for you. So definitely want to pay attention to your septic. When we had our septic system inspected, the previous owners had been driving over top of it, which is not a recommended procedure, because it tends to compact the soil and lessen the ability of that soil to function as a leach field or a drain field. So you can have grass over it. It's a play area. Stays green even in dry summers because of the drain field. It's not going to be, unless it's leaking or not functioning properly, there shouldn't be any issues with that. You just don't want to have it in a space that you would want to grow a garden, because you don't want to be growing over top of a drain field, because the root intrusion would tend to destroy the drain field. Existing structures are a huge benefit for purchasing existing property, a house in particular. Houses range in price from $100 to $155 a square foot, depending on where you are in building material availability. Can range up to $310,000 just for the house, depending on designs and features. So when you're looking at property by itself, it has its cost. Then you have your development costs, and then you have your structure costs. And this is just the building structure cost that we're looking at here. Garages can be up to $27,000, and they can be like $7,000 in materials. So they can be built for fairly inexpensive if you can do the labor yourself, but it can be quite expensive if you have to build them yourself. Barns or shops can be up to 20 grand. A variety of different styles that are available, from horse barns to utility barns and garages, dairy barns. So if you have an existing barn, you're a huge step ahead in that department. So adding those costs together in conjunction with property values in the area can help you understand the value of a particular given property. Our property that we were able to purchase was in distress. It was a bank sale and was undervalued based on what we wanted to build and the property values that we were noting in our local research for a home. So we were able to jump on the property and move quickly, knowing the value of the structures and the land in our area. So those are things to have a good handle on in your particular locale. Of course, property has lots of variables associated with it. If you're just looking at the property alone, its value, the assessed value, raw land. There's a 20-acre parcel in Skagit County that runs about $250,000 an acre for 20. In another part of the state, $139,000 for 20 acres. But there's great variability, terrain-wise, moisture-wise, sun exposure wise. So Pateros, Washington burned up here like 3 years ago with some huge fires, grassland and wildland fires. So those are things to consider. The Skagit County area right now, one of the hassles it happens to have is the well drilling moratorium, so that even existing wells on unbuilt territory can't be utilized even if they exist. So there's just different hurdles in different places that one has to engage in and pray through. So 5 acres can range in variability and pricing as well. So as you look, you will notice those variabilities. Some potential challenges, we've talked about sewer and septic, power, water. Remodeling may need to be something that you engage in. If you have a move-in ready place that is just how you want it, what a blessing. But if you move into a place that has been through some use and some distress and isn't how you can live in it, then there may be some significant remodeling that needs to take place. The place that we moved into had non-functional appliances and a dated kitchen that precluded its usage as it stood. So we ended up camping out essentially and cooking for the period of time it took us to remodel our kitchen. Other features may have things that need to be addressed. We had to redo a bathroom after discovering that there was a washing machine that was discharging its water into the wall instead of into the standpipe, into the septic area, which mushroomed a simple bathroom remodel into a wall reconfiguration, a joist restructuring, and a 2-room tile job. So things can mushroom on you and may need to be done sooner than later depending on various factors that arise. If you're looking at an addition that has permit costs involved and inspections that one would need to take into consideration. You may also have boundary issues and access issues. We did on our property, and those held up the purchase process. In addition, there were potential structures, power sources that need to be relocated if boundaries were where they had been stated to be. But after a survey of our boundary, found out that we were within our property boundary limitations, and so that was not a factor. So it was an added expense, but we also have a clear knowledge of where our boundary lines are, and that's important to be aware of. These are just some pictures of some before and after remodels of kitchens and bathrooms, two of the most common places that people dive into in remodeling. You know, you can take a dated bathroom that's functional, but make it more functional by remodeling it and reconfiguring it to be more functional, have more space available in it for your use. Kitchens can become more functional, have more efficient space usage. So there are many things that can be done if one feels compelled or handy to do that, although there are time and cost associations associated with that. So just remember that this world is not my home. We're just passing through. It's a place where it's an outpost for ministry, essentially. And remember Matthew 6:21 that states, where your treasure is, there will your heart be also. If we place our treasure in the work of redeeming souls versus in our castles, then we won't feel compelled to stay with our castle as opposed to being able to leave when we need to. The Lord would have his people looking about them and securing humble, inexpensive places as centers for their work, evangelism, page 402, and selected messages 2, Christ is at the door. Do not consider deprivation when you are called to leave the cities and move out into the country places. Here there await rich blessings for those who will grasp them. By beholding the scenes of God's handiwork, imperceptibly you'll be changed into the same image. As you enter and continue through this process of following God's will in your life for moving into the country, just continue to pray and lead and follow his leading as he guides you. May the Lord bless you.